Hi there, this is Storimony. Let me tell you a story.
This is a story of a king's son who conspired against his own father.
Absalom was the son of King David and Queen Maacah. David was the king of Israel at that time. Absalom had a sister named Tamar who was raped by their stepbrother Amnon. During that horrendous time, Tamar went to her brother Absalom, and he said to her, "Has that Amnon been with you? Be quiet, my sister, he's your brother, don't take this to heart." Tamar moved into her brother's house as a desolate woman. Absalom never said a word to Amnon, either good or bad. But he hated him because he disgraced his sister. 2 years later, Absalom invited all his brothers to a party of his own. He went to his father David and asked him to join him, but the king refused and gave him his blessing to go on. However, Absalom urged his father to let Amnon and all his brothers come with him to the party, and he agreed. When the party began, Absalom ordered his men to kill Amnon when he is fully drunk and in high spirits. And they did so. They killed Amnon, and upon seeing this, all the king's sons ran away. A report reached the king that all his sons had been killed by Absalom. As he started to mourn, the king's brother told him only Amnon was dead. This had been Absalom's expressed intention ever since the day Amnon raped his sister. Meanwhile, Absalom fled to his grandfather king of Geshur and stayed there for 3 years. His father David the king started missing him and longed to see him, for he was consoled on Amnon's death. Joab, the commander of the king's army, knew that the king's heart longed for Absalom. After a little bit of persuasion not to bring him back, the king ordered Joab to bring back Absalom. Joab went to Geshur and brought back Absalom to Jerusalem. But the king said that Absalom must go to his own house and must not see the king's face. And Absalom did as he was told. By this time Absalom had 3 sons and a daughter whom he named after his sister Tamar. He lived in Jerusalem for 2 years without seeing the king's face. He sent for Joab to send him to the king, but Joab refused to come. So he burnt his field, and Joab now found a reason to go and see Absalom. He tried to complain, but Absalom told him that he has to go and ask the king why he asked him to come back to Jerusalem. He wanted to see the king's face. And if he was guilty for anything, he was ready to be punished. So, Joab went to the king and told him this. Then the king summoned Absalom, and he came in and bowed his face to the ground before the king. In the course of time, Absalom provided himself with an army. In all of Israel, there was not a man so highly praised for his handsome appearance as Absalom. From the top of his head to the sole of his foot, there was no blemish in him. He would get up early in the morning and stand by the side of the road leading to the city. Whenever anyone came with a complaint before the king for a decision, Absalom would call out to him and campaign his leadership. He would say, "If only I were appointed judge in the land. Then everyone who has a complaint or case could come to me, and I would see that he receives justice." Also, whenever anyone approached him to bow down before him, Absalom would reach out his hand, take hold of him, and kiss him. Absalom behaved in this way toward all the Israelites who came to the king asking for justice, and so he stole the hearts of the people of Israel. At the end of 4 years, Absalom said to the king, "Let me go to Hebron and fulfill a vow I made to the Lord. While your servant was living at Geshur in Aram, I made this vow: if the Lord takes me back to Jerusalem, I will worship the Lord in Hebron." The king said to him, "Go in peace." So, he went to Hebron, and 200 men had accompanied him. Then Absalom sent secret messengers throughout the tribes of Israel to say, "As soon as you hear the sound of the trumpets, then say, 'Absalom is king in Hebron.'" The 200 men had been invited as guests and went quite innocently, knowing nothing about the matter. While Absalom was offering sacrifices, he also sent for the king's counselor to come from his hometown. And so the conspiracy gained strength, and Absalom's following kept on increasing. A messenger came and told David, "The hearts of the people of Israel are with Absalom." Then David said to all his officials who were with him in Jerusalem, "Come, We must flee, or none of us will escape from Absalom. We must leave immediately, or he will move quickly to overtake us and bring ruin on us and put the city to the sword." So the king set out, with his entire household and all the people following him, and they halted at the edge of the city. King David continued up the Mount of Olives, weeping as he went. His head was covered, and he was barefoot. When David arrived at the summit, his friend Hushai was there to meet him, but the king told him to return to the city and he could help him by frustrating the counselor's advice. So Hushai, David's confidant, arrived in Jerusalem as Absalom was entering the city. He went to Absalom and said to him, "Long live the king! Long live the king!" Absalom questioned his loyalty and Hushai proved himself loyal to Absalom. Absalom sought the advice of the king's counselor on some matters, and he also summoned Hushai to hear his opinion. And he saw Hushai's advice was better than the king's counselor. For the Lord had determined to frustrate the good advice of the counselor in order to bring disaster on Absalom. Hushai told the priests, "The counselor has advised Absalom and the elders of Israel to do such and such, but I have advised them to do so and so. Now send a message at once and warn the king." So the priests left at once and went to hide in the house of a certain woman in town. A young man saw the priests and told Absalom. When Absalom's men came to the woman at the house, they asked, "Where are the priests?" The woman answered them, "They crossed over the brook." The men searched but found no one, so they returned to Jerusalem. After they had gone, the two priests came out of the hiding and went to inform King David. David mustered the men who were with him and appointed over them commanders of thousands and commanders of hundreds. David's army marched out of the city to fight Israel, and the battle spread out over the whole countryside, and the forest swallowed up more men that day than the sword. Now Absalom happened to meet David's men. He was riding his mule, and as the mule went under the thick branches of a large oak, Absalom's hair got caught in the tree. He was left hanging in midair, while the mule he was riding kept on going. Joab took 3 javelins in his hand and plunged them into Absalom's heart while Absalom was still alive in the oak tree. And 10 of Joab's armor-bearers surrounded Absalom, struck him and killed him. They took Absalom, threw him into a big pit in the forest and piled up a large heap of rocks over him. Meanwhile, all the Israelites fled to their homes. News reached the king about the death of his son Absalom, and the king was shaken. He went up to the room over the gateway and cried. As he went, he said, "Oh, my son Absalom! My son Absalom! If only I had died instead of you, O Absalom, my son, my son." Then Joab went into the house to the king and said, "Today you have humiliated all your men, who have just saved your life and the lives of your sons and daughters and the lives of your wives and concubines. You love those who hate you and hate those who love you. You have made it clear today that the commanders and their men mean nothing to you. I see that you would be pleased if Absalom were alive today and all of us were dead." So the king got up and took his seat in the gateway. He won over the hearts of the men of Judah so that they were all of one mind. They sent word to the king, "Return, you and all your men." Then the king returned and went as far as the Jordan. During his lifetime, Absalom had taken a pillar and erected it in the king's valley as a monument to himself, for he thought, "I have no son to carry on the memory of my name." He named the pillar after himself, and it is called Absalom's monument to this day. The end.